Hey, good morning. Um, how's it going today? Are you guys excited about learning about the right way forward to the economy 4.0? Yeah, cool. We've got really, really exciting people with us today, and I mean, if you've been here over the week, you already know that we've been talking about this for a while. So we're going to try with this panel to bring some fresh insights into AI ethics and how the right way forward should be something companies look into now, because this is the time that AI is really being developed to meet needs for businesses, for consumers, and everything else, right? Um, so we've got a strong sort of section here of panelists. We've got large company, we've got a large major leader in AI with IBM, and you've got Revolut, fintech sort of giant, and they're doing a lot of interesting things, right? You've got a robotics company, Garuda, and you got Youzu, who's doing interesting games and creating sort of using AI to nurture young minds, right? So I'm going to start this discussion by asking them what their impression of the right sort of AI or the right way to develop AI is. Right? I'm just going to ask all of the panelists to pick up the mic, introduce themselves in a little bit, and talk about what they think is the right path to AI.
So I guess I'll get started. My name is Jiin. I'm CTO co-founder of Garuda Robotics. So our main focus is on drones. We are active in various industries, from agriculture to inspections and infrastructure inspections to now security, and upcoming you hear a lot about from us on doing drone deliveries. We're doing a lot of research on beyond visual line of sight flights. We're also spending a lot of time with computer vision, generally the deep learning kind of computer vision where, as you can imagine, security use cases, finding needle in a haystack, where's your mas selamat when you're flying your drones around. Traditionally, we've also been using AI in terms of computer vision in agriculture, for example, for tree counting, for determining healthy and unhealthy trees, and so on. So what is the right way? I guess that's a multiple level kind of question. So maybe just to get started, one thing we do take a serious view of things in AI is that a lot of this has to be kind of customer driven, and we always put the customer's data privacy in high regard to make sure that a lot of this information we collect for our customers are not for public consumption, right? So you can imagine if you are serving, say, the police force doing surveillance for public safety, those kind of information has to be kept locked up in as secure as possible kind of a place, right? And let the other panelists also introduce themselves.
So I'm Chi-Keong, and I look after the AI Innovation Lab for Youzu. So if you have been bothered by the GOT, Game of Thrones games that keep popping up in your browser, actually that game belongs to us, so we're responsible for it, right? So contrary to what a lot of people, what I usually, how I introduce ourselves, the Youzu is not just games. We actually take our social responsibilities very, very seriously, which is why you look at the different verticals that we have. We actually have got Youzu Sports, right? So this is one part of us trying to nurture the next generation and so on. So in terms of the key questions that is posed by Soumik, it is not an easy question to answer because there's so many levels to it. But one of the things that as a company that we do is to take care of our community. We don't just see them as our customers, we see them as part of the community. So in fact, one of the first AI projects that was launched through the company, as I was actually sharing with them, is how do we actually protect them from online preps and so on and so forth, right? That's just part of it. So if you look at and to be honest, gaming don't really have a very good reputation at this point in time. We are responsible for things like, the game addiction, things like, the cause of high myopia in kids. These are the two issues that as a company, we actually look into and bang our heads about. Because this is not what we want. The mission for Youzu is actually to share simple joy. And to share simple joy, it means that we don't want you to be bothered about being addicted to it. We don't want you to be scared of your high myopia. So these are two issues that we are trying to make use of data to address. Right, so these are some of the things that we as a company could help moving forward. Right.
My name is Dileep, and I lead the data and AI practice for Asia Pacific for IBM. I think there are two aspects to how you should do AI, right, generally put. First is build with purpose. So instead of be user-centric or be human-centric in your design, understand the problem you're trying to solve and who you're solving it for. That means you're getting a step away from a technology view and you think about the impact on the people who will use the technology. And that has a radical impact on how you design, number one. And number two, you have to think of the difference between building a little app or a little application that can do something in development or in pilot, and how that works in a production environment. So you really have to think about the information architecture that underlies any good AI. So I think you bring those two together and you have a successful AI experience and AI business.
Everyone, so I represent Revolut, and for those of you who don't know about Revolut, we are Europe's fastest growing digital bank, right? And we're expanding internationally in Asia Pacific with Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and Japan in the first phase, and in North America at the same time as well, right? So when it comes to banking or digital banking for all regulated financial institutions, right? The question that we all face is, especially when it comes to leveraging AI, is how do we leverage AI that makes sense for the business, right, in terms of increasing our margins and operational efficiency, but how do we also leverage that to make sure that we provide value for our customers and protecting them from online card fraud, money laundering, and terrorism financing as well. So that is how we look through the AI lens. Yep.
So just by listening to all four of the panelists, right, you can obviously gather that the right path to AI is very, very different for each one of them, right? So we're going to take this forward a little bit and talk to Dileep. Dileep, a lot of companies, especially IBM, right, one of the biggest companies in technology, talks very vocally about ethics in AI. So that there's a certain way that they have in mind for the future. There's a trajectory that they expect to follow. But a lot of companies don't have such a sort of framework or a strategy in place. So for them, how do you think they should start thinking about the problem? What are some of the first steps they need to take before they get into the ethics question for AI?
Very good question. I don't think at some level the ethics question for AI is any different than the ethics question for how you run your business, right? You have to treat your customers with respect in accordance with legal principles and requirements, and you have to deliver the value you promised, right? So that doesn't change, and I think that's really good. From an AI perspective, I think the ethics comes in when you say, what is the impact going to be on my workforce? How's it going to change my customers' experience radically? Because you're really revolutionizing your business. And in that, there's always this question of, oh, do I just make this a fast process for everyone and make it automated, which is a typical plan, or do I just recommend them products that I associate with their activities? And so I think companies don't have to be big to address those problems by looking at, number one, bias in data that exists. So I think all companies have to really question what is the data that is forming and informing the AI that then acts upon it, number one. And number two, and we advise this to our clients, is that when they're looking at making activities automated, they actually should look at how they augment the people in the enterprise. Because there's a lot more power in the employee base if they're freed up from doing monotonous tasks. And so I think we have an obligation to keep presenting that opportunity to companies, and companies have an obligation, I think, to think about how to get the most out of a workforce through augmented intelligence versus replacing people.
Cool. Chester, so banks generally have access to a lot of data for customers, right? And customers trust banks to to give them the data and for them to protect it very well, right? Given Revolut's growth, it's in a similar position right now with customer data. It has earned the trust of customers and has access to plenty of data that's critical, right? It's personal financial data. So in that sense, you have a sort of bigger responsibility when it comes to ethics or when it comes to using data for the right things. You could actually use that data to benefit yourself. You could use it to market to them in a way that just benefits you, right? But obviously, you're not going to do that. So what determines how you're going to use customer data, and how do you start strategizing about it? Where do you draw the line?
I think, like I mentioned earlier just now, right, that the priorities when it comes to financial institutions is because we're dealing with people's money, we need to keep their finances safe and from their banking details safe, right? So one of the key problems that customers face is that, let's say for UK and France alone, online credit card fraud costs the industry up to 1.8 billion euros, right? And every time you input your credit card details online, let's say to a hotel, online hotel booking, or your flights booking, those 16 digits might get risk of being hacked and a hacker stealing those details and using it, right? So in order for us to protect our customers' funds and making sure that the right person is spending that, that's where our focus is, right? So we introduce different algorithms to make sure that, we call it Revolut, right? So one of it is knowing who your customers are, and the second is Sherlock, right? Making sure that the transaction that's being through is actually done by you, right? And because of introductions of these two algorithms, right, we've managed to stop or at least reduce online financial card fraud, right? And that's just in the fighting financial crime space. And then there's other areas where it's in terms of compliance, right? How do you know who the person that you're banking is really who they say they are, right? And through these introductions, we've managed to uncover money laundering rings, right? Who have been trying to use our systems to just move money around and withdraw it internationally. So that's how we're using AI just to protect our customers, basically. Yep.
In the financial services space, right? AI is often it's often used to make decisions about who to lend to, right? And that's very, very critical, because that is a place where bias can creep in very easily, right? So how do you make sure that the data that you have to train the AI is not going to be biased? And I'm going to expand that question to everybody else on the panel as well. So starting with you, Chester, once you explain that, probably you can jump in, and Dileep, and explain why it's important for companies to address the problem of data accuracy and bias early on before they develop the AI model, and then move on into creating something that's going to help the business across.
I think at least whereas Revolut is concerned, we don't provide loans and credits. But one of the areas where, or at least when it comes to financial institutions, is that we also face edge cases, right? Just like, and that, what I mean by this is that we have little to no data when it comes to customers' previous history, spending, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like how your iPhone can't recognize your face in the morning, right? It's the same thing for online credit card fraud. You're getting loans as well. So we can't recognize how people used to spend early before they even got on Revolut, right? So that's why when it comes to AI, there's lots of sharing that needs to happen, that like what our friend earlier said. So I think there's lots to be answered. So that's something that we're exploring at the same time as well. Yeah.
Dileep?
So first I'll start that AI will always have bias. You can't scrub the data enough to do that, because anything that is a model is by definition biased, right? You're just predicting what might or might not be the case. But you can do a lot during the build phase of your model to identify the sources of bias, and that means using tools that help you explain what your models are doing and trace their activity. And I think explainability and traceability are really important at the start. And then almost more importantly, once you go into a run environment on a daily basis, you need to be able to go and do that same process of explainability, traceability, and bias mitigation throughout the life cycle of that model. Because the models then will become very static and stale as your business changes and people begin to change and the behaviors change. So I think, and there are tools today that do that. IBM has them, other companies have them. And I think those are critical these days, and more decision processes, even if they're human managed, are handed over to AI to do the bulk of the work.
Yeah. So I think what Dileep says is absolutely spot on. By definition, the only way we can make a prediction is because it's biased. Data is biased. Data is a reflection of the culture that we have now. So what we believe is bias now might not be bias in the past or in the future. So rather than looking at the data, my thought is that we should be looking at the education and training of the next wave of data scientists and data engineers. Because right now, you look at the schools, in the way in which the curriculum were being set up, everybody knows how to game it so that they could get good accuracies. Even in Kaggle, a lot of people get started in Kaggle competitions, but the only way you can make it a top 10, top 100 is to make use of the bias that's in the data, right? So that kind of perception of what makes a good data scientist need to change. And I think as the old people in the industry right now, we need to actually tell the people that, guys, this is not the way you want to do it, right? We need to introduce new ways of thinking into our data mining process, data analytics process. Right.
So I take a slightly different perspective from that because I actually like guys who know how to game the system based on the bias, because a lot of the use cases we deal with is, like you say, so I think the implicit thing about bias you're talking about here is a cultural bias, right? Most white faces goes into the recognition of a face, for example, and therefore they don't recognize an Indian or a Chinese. But we actually need these biases when it comes to deploying different kind of robotic systems. For example, if I'm doing an agricultural one and I'm working in a palm oil plantation, it better be biased, the data set better be biased to Malaysia, Indonesia, that kind of a landscape, than say soy or corn or wheat in the Americas, which that's why we can't use anything that comes out of overseas because they don't have the same landscape. Similarly, because of the way we train our models, some models will take longer to get better accuracy, but some models we actually prefer the data set to be simple, and we want to train it to bias for action. For example, if you're going to do onboard detect and avoid systems, where the drones need to avoid itself by looking at, using vision algorithms to say, hey, there's a thing in front, there's a human in front. I rather make it such that it's biased towards, oh, I'm not going to go forward. I'm not sure if it's a person, a chimpanzee, or whatever. I'm just not going to go forward, right? So all these. With every issue, we can obviously turn it into basically an advantage for the business, depending on what kind of use case we have it.
So in your opinion, what do you think companies should do, right, when they're starting with AI? Is it even something they should be concerned about? Because hearing what you just said, it sounds like people don't really need to be concerned about it right now. Is that what you would say?
Not really. So I think there are, again, many levels there, right? So what we talked about just now was bias, but in the larger picture, your question is more of bias as applied to the ethics side of things. Whether it's ethical to use the biasness inherent in the AI to get business done, right? So we do separate those discussions separately, right? So at the ethical level, we pay a lot of attention because we do know with great powers comes great responsibility. Now that we can fly, we have autonomous flights, the drone flies itself. What if a drone flies a packet of drugs from Singapore to Malaysia, right? That is punishable by death. So who dies? If, let's say, somebody actually delivers drugs across I just brought this up because this morning I was reading news and I saw some drug trafficker being sentenced to death and all this. What if a drone did it? And the drone is not piloted by anybody but except the AI. But around that AI, there's a couple of people, the commander, the guy who actually loaded the drone and let it off from the landing station, the guy who charged the drone, the air traffic controller, and so on. Who is responsible? Who is the liable person? I think that's usually the bigger question that we have to address on every single use case that we launch to make sure that there is always responsibility, and also we are also doing a lot of work to work with the government to say how can the regulations also change to address all these use cases that were not even a use case in the past. Right? So we know that we are on the right side of the law, we are on the moral side of the law, and so on.
So it's important to just pause for a second and note this, that you're saying that ethics would really be impactful when it comes to or concerns human beings, right? If it doesn't concern a human being, you're saying it doesn't really matter. Essentially that's what you're saying, right? So in that context, right, you have a lot of AI that's part of financial services. You have AI in recruiting. IBM does a lot of work with that, with Watson. So could you comment a little bit about whether you think that's really the case, or you think that ethics in AI should matter, to everything across the board for every organization?
So I think there's two parts to this. There's the question of ethics and the question of bias, right? So ethics applies to our society. So do you treat your car ethically or not, to me, is a non-issue. It's your car. You do what you want with it, provided it's legal. So I would say ethics applies to how we interact with each other, how we use our tools, and how those tools impact people and societies. So I don't think it has a function of how it affects other tools, except there's some follow-on impact on society. The question of bias should be looked at across the board, because sometimes bias is really good if you're doing anomaly detection, if you're detecting for certain things, or it's bad if it's unintended and you're skewing your answers. So bias is across the board, ethics is with people.
Do you have any other?
Yeah, so maybe to be exact, right? So morals and ethics are essentially human-centric, right? So it's not to say that, or maybe let me put it another way, right? There are standards out there that require robotics company to ensure that there's no decision that's made by any robots, by any AI, that is not directly tied to a human being, whether it's the programmer, whether it's the guy who trained the model, or whether it's the operator. So on. So we are in the drone space. In the drone space, the current legal requirements, everything goes to the operator. So the operator needs to know if they are actually flying a drone autonomously, what kind of AI systems using, and under what kind of circumstances would they make certain decisions, right? So, but that might not be the case for other kind of robotics. Right? So in each specific use cases, we might need to ask ourselves, who is the one responsible? Right? And then eventually it will come back to moral and ethics, because the we don't operate in a vacuum. So even if the impact is on like choosing which tree is healthy or not healthy, for example, as an AI, there's still implications there, right? You choose an unhealthy tree, maybe you harvest the fruit and the person eats it and it dies. Sorry, I keep coming back to death. It might be, there's also some more implications downstream from whatever decisions you make upstream. Right?
Isn't that a little difficult to answer, because AI, if it's really advanced, right, if it's really complicated, then you don't really know. There's not much transparency into how the decisions are made, and that's something again, we are researching as an industry, right? So in that case, how would you say that companies can think about this problem in that context?
Maybe the banking will be a good idea, but I would say that complexity doesn't relieve you of your obligation, right? You don't get to hide behind it and say AI is too complex. And that was the answer until recently. And now there are many better tools that are operational, which helps you understand what is the reason it's doing it, and can I trace that reason? So I think that's important. We can't just say, oh, it's too complex for us, we don't worry about why it got there. And I think probably the banking context has that probably on the forefront.
At least for where banking institutions are concerned, we have guidance from regulatory bodies, right? This is how you recognize money laundering or terrorism financing. So it's not so much of our data scientists coming up with algorithms based on their own experiences or their family or friends' experience. It is based on guidance, which regulators have seen of how money has been laundered or has been funding terrorism as well. So at least there is this less bias in that sense.
Yeah, but from Chester, I think Revolut doesn't, probably lend money, and it's not in that space yet. But for other banks that are, could you provide some comments in terms of how they should look at this, the whole problem of bias and ethics in the AI space? Because it really affects lives. So, for example, if somebody can't get credit, right, because they're of a certain color or of a certain race, that's going to really impact them. And as the panel already discussed, right, it's something that's something that's critical for them. It's important for them to be able to make that distinction, and it's a human being, right? So again, it's really, really important. So how do you think banks should think about this problem?
Honestly, I've got no answer to that question at this stage. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
So probably just to mention that the bias is probably just one part of ethics. At the social level, we have got things like potential unemployment caused by AI. You go down one level, you look at all the recommendation systems that's out there. They are actually biasing our perception to what to buy and so on. Is that right? I mean, Facebook got fined in the US because they allowed ads that actually target certain people from only seeing certain houses, right? But in the Singapore context, we allow that, in fact, because there's a race quota for it. So bias, again, depends on different culture. You look at within a company, the decisions that we make in designing our algorithms and so on and so forth. there's ethical questions about it as well. For instance, you know that AI is good for a company, for their progression and growth, so on. But if there is a problem in your current algorithm right now, and it might not cause a serious impact, do you raise it up to your senior management? Because if you raise it up, it could impact or slow down the progression of AI within your company. So there are so many levels of ethics that we could actually we grapple with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, since you brought it up, and I've been meaning to ask all of you guys this question, lights out manufacturing, right? Where there's no human being and there's basically machines running everything, 100% automation. That is the ultimate Industry 4.0 model. Why is that something that people fight, and why should we think of that as something that in the light of AI and ethics, right? In that context, why should we think of that, and is that right?
So I question whether that is the right endpoint, right? To start, I think that's an assumption that lights out manufacturing, lights out business is at the right point in the absence of a big change of how we operate as a society, right? So given the way we operate today, I think it's important for us as we build solutions to understand the impact on the workforce and the opportunities that AI presents. So we always take cost, people say cost reduction, I make it faster, simpler, but there's a huge amount of human intellect that can be released. So companies that focus on that, I think, are the ones that will succeed. So I'll give a quick example. When we started doing visual recognition in radiology for bone fractures, right, the error rate of a radiologist was about 5%, was their error rate. When the AI was trained and it looked at the bone fractures, its error rate was 3%. So the old school thinking is, hey, replace all the radiologists. Actually, when the radiologist and the computer are working together, the error rate was 1%. Right? So there's a much better outcome for patients if you couple AI with people and change what people are doing. So I think the Industry 4.0 goal should say, how do I get the most out of human capital using AI, whatever that outcome is? Because saying you're going to replace people is a predetermined it's a consequence of something and not really an outcome in and of itself.
Sure. So I'll add to that. So I see that on a daily basis in every single vertical we work on, right? In agriculture, how do we do better plantation management is not to have human beings comb the place all the time looking for disease, but for the drones to find the disease and send the human beings there to solve the problem on the site. We find this in tower inspections or our telco customers, right? We don't need the person to rig and climb the place, and we just have the robots do the inspection. 99% of the time it's fine, right? You only climb up when there's problems. And then there's the question of job creation, as you say, right? So I think we have created more jobs than the people we fire. The honest thing is that there's for each drone that gets created, that gets into operations, there's more people that has to be upgraded from just maybe say a security guard to a security guard who knows how to operate drones. That's a much higher level job. And at the same time, behind the scenes, there's the person who designed the drone, manufactured the drone, writes the software, and so on and so forth. And in the long run, there will be a class of jobs that will be lost. But at the same time, when we address this class of jobs, let me give you an example. In Singapore, we have a lot of people in the 50s and the 60s who just do nothing but walk around ports, state land, HDB is in front, right? Their job is to make sure like you have 1.5 meters of empty space in front of your house so that you can run, escape when there's fire. Manholes are closed so that no random person walks into a manhole. All these could be replaced by simple drones or robots rolling around and flying around just checking. And there's no one who graduated out of school today who wants that kind of job. Right? So I think as an economy and as a way we do things, we will just improve accordingly with the advent of AI.
And I think there's an implicit assumption in the question that we're doing everything we need to do today. If you look at your own lives and your jobs, how much gets left on the table or deprioritized because you don't have time, right? So just taking what we do today and automating it frees up time to do all the stuff we could do better. So I think there's some assumptions in the statement that are probably wrong.
So one of the things that you raised right now was you're going to create more jobs, right? Then you're going to actually lose or disrupt, right? Again, what people generally say or experts generally say is that we're going to create those jobs, but are we going to have enough people to fill those jobs? Because those jobs, right? Somebody who's going to walk around the field, right, looking at crops and seeing or determining if there's disease, right? he cannot be somebody who's tasked with repairing a drone. Yeah,
Yes.
and training him to do that is going to be really, really hard. A lot of them might not even be, skilled or adept at doing that or interested in doing that, right? So how do you make sure that the balance, the companies get the balance right?
So I don't believe in that. So maybe 50 years ago, if you ask anybody in the room, could you operate a $50,000 GPS device to accurately determine where you are on Earth? They look at you and say, you need a GIS degree. Now everybody does it with his phone, right? Maybe in the future, drones is just press the play button and it just works, right? I think it is for us, the technology people, to make it easy enough so that they can then carry out those jobs at 100 times productivity or whatever they can do today. Most of the technology we design today works in a command center. And those command center environments, eventually it will be operated by the same people who operate command centers today. But today they are just operating, say, a CCTV camera. The same personnel must be able to operate a flying camera, right? So that's the perspective from a technology standpoint. And I think we will get there eventually as we make everything simpler and easier to use. So the question now I think you're asking is, there's no correlation between the operators and the engineers, right? Which then brings me to, I think, Chi-Keong's point, which is education plays a very large part about upskilling our general populace to learn AI, right? The good sign that I did see in the last 1 or 2 years is that the number of resumes I'm getting that has data science in it has been increasing, which means everyone is trying, right? So I think the general population is actually trying to learn more about data science and get their feet wet. And if the trend continues, we should have the workforce large enough to come into the workforce to support all the AI roles.
Singapore is doing a lot of stuff in terms of educating its people, but a lot of the other Southeast Asian countries aren't, right? So, what do you think? Is it a business's responsibility to train and educate the next generation of people for the jobs of sorts, or is it something that regulators should take part in?
My short answer is yes. It's always the business who needs to lead the way when it comes to new technology. Regulators are there to regulate, to make sure that we do not overstep the boundaries that we should as a businesses. But and also they can assist us, right, through grants and other mechanisms that they have. But the businesses needs to have the customers and the people that they're serving at their hearts, so that they need to lead that AI effort and train the people.
And I think the role of government is to provide the platform for people who might not be in a business or might not have the financial means to do it themselves. So I think Singapore is doing a lot in that regard with their learning forums and ability to convert credits for taking these classes. So there's a role of government, but not for regulators.
Yeah, everybody has got a role actually. In fact, every one of us here in the room, it is not just the individual companies. Even if companies do not have the culture of educating, we as mentors in the field, we should take up the challenge and move ahead. The government should provide such a platform for the youth, for people who get displaced, this opportunity to upskill. I mean, this is an area where Singapore government is doing a good job, right? So not sure about how we can't enforce such a model to the rest of Southeast Asia, but I think what we have here is a good model in which they could look at and see whether it applies to their own culture.
We're almost out of time, so I think we're going to wait for questions from Slido and everyone in the room. We're going to open up the floor to ask some questions for our panel. I think we've had a good discussion. We've raised a lot of points for discussion. You could follow them up, in the networking area and discuss them with them. I think one of the things that's important to realize is the question of ethics for different industries, for different businesses, for different companies and industries would be really, really sort of different. Everyone has a different perspective, and every individual would also have a different perspective. We've seen that in the panel today. A lot of people have also been vocal about ethics and AI sort of thing, and a lot of companies have chosen to stay silent about it. So again, if you have any questions, raise up your hand. We'll bring up a mic to you, and can we have a mic, please?
Thank you for some very helpful and insightful perspectives. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Soumik. My question, I guess, revolves around that there's a lot of focus at the moment on building models, harvesting AI, testing that, challenging the assumptions. I presume at some point models will get to a stage where it's counterintuitive to continue relearning. I guess question to all of you, to what extent within your organizations have processes started to come into place to look at retirement and replacement of models?
So within IBM, it's a good point, right? And it's not so much about replacement of models, it's about keeping them updated in real time. So you're right, models will become stale as the business changes, as people change and what's important changes. So it's important that all companies have a way to keep those models updated. And they'll change so much over time, maybe you won't recognize them, but I think that's an important part of being successful in the long term.
Processes is just one of the things. The ethics needs to be part of the corporate culture. So earlier I was pointing out the online community and how we protect them. It's actually quite amazing how innovative people can be when they want to beat the system. So for example, in China, you are not allowed to mention certain political issues or political names. So when they can't type it out, they use images. When they can't use image, they break up images, multiple images, and so on and so forth. So as a company, we need to continuously monitor performance, but we also need to be able to be brave enough to say, all right, I've not done a good job in this. I've got the feedback system in place from the customers telling us, guys, you miss out, and we fix it. So it's not just, it cannot be just a internal process alone. The entire company needs to be there to be brave enough to say, all right, I'm still learning in this brave new world. Right?
I want to build on that as well, right? And for us, at least where financial institutions are concerned, there is no set date as to when we review our processes, right? It's an ongoing process, and it's much more about enhancement and adjustments to how people are managing their finances, doing spending, and also how the bad guys are coming to game the system as well. How terrorism groups are trying to move money around the world, how money laundering is happening. So we don't, besides having a set metrics of how they usually behave, we identify patterns as to how they usually move money, new ways of identifying themselves, who they say they are, and where they usually send money to as well. So it's a constant adjustment and trying to play cat and mice sometimes as well. Yeah.
Maybe just to round it up, we are also playing the same cat and mice thing with the regulation side as well, because in the drone industry, the rules are changing year after year, and every country has a different view and different rule sets around it. So we see it as the way we upgrade software, right? So when the rules change or before the rules change, we need to get ourselves ready. Today, if I fly a drone at a HDB block, you will call the police and say, I'm peeping into your house. But maybe tomorrow, that's the de facto way that HDB is going to use to find cracks in the building. What can you say, right? So it depends on the environment that we're operating in.
Cool. Do we have any other questions? Okay, cool. I'm going to thank the panel for their time. You've been really amazing. Thank you so much.